Okay, what we're going to do here is a initial kind of test of a black magic timer. So the object of this test is to learn about the timer and make sure that you understand how to connect up everything that needs to be connected to the timer, and you connect it in the right place. When the timer is delivered to you, inside the timer there's a flight program. This program is not quite the same as you'd use for flying your airplane. It's used for testing the timer, but it shows movement of all the servos and the radio DT and the hooks and so on, so you can use that to understand about the timer. Now we've got together here, and you can see all the parts. In the middle is the timer. Across the top, because this is a 3-servo timer, we've got 3 servos. On the left we have a battery. Underneath it we have a radio DT unit, and then on the right hand side, instead of using a tow hook, we've got what's called a Magictimer test harness, and this is used for testing the timer. So now let's look at what we're going to do. The first part is let's zero in on the timer, and you'll see that on the timer itself there's a power switch. So the first thing we do is we're going to turn that off. Then on the back of the timer there are 2 rows of connectors. So our first test is going to be to connect things to the first row of connectors. Now with the timer you would have got something called the timer pinout. This is a description that shows what each of these connectors is used for. So while you're doing this test, you'll have that pinout next to you. So the first thing we're going to do is connect the battery. Now in my case here, you'll see I've cut a little notch out of the battery, and so I'm going to plug that battery in, and note it goes on the inner row because you can see the outer row. It's very important that this goes on the inner row. Now the next thing we're going to do is connect up one of these servos. So here's a servo, and you look on the connector, you can see the servos have different colored wires that indicate whether, which is the ground wire and the signal wire and so on. On this servo, that brown wire is the ground wire. But you also notice that you can see these little metal markings in the servo. Now most of the servos, all those are put on so that those little metal markings are shown. So here we're going to plug that in next to that. Now the final thing that goes on that back row is the tow hook. And here is the tow hook, so we're going to plug this in. Now on a tow hook for a glider, so I'm going to move these others out of the way, so we've just got the 3 items that we have connected. Now what we're going to do is turn the timer on. So I'm going to push this little switch on the back, that's the number 1 switch, and so it's turned on. The timer beeps and makes a noise. This noise at 1 beep means, in fact, that the DT is set to 3 minutes. Now, if you step back and look, what we're going to do, here is this, like the tow hook, and pushing this button here is like pulling the hook forward. So you notice when it does that the servo moves a tiny amount. So that's like when you are towing your glider, the servo can move a tiny amount. The next thing we're going to do is simulate the process when you launch your glider. So what happens then is the tow hook is forward, and then there's an unlatch switch on. So we're going to push that unlatch switch, and then let them both go. Now notice how the servo moves a whole lot more. So that's what it would be doing, taking it through the bunt process. So what we've done so far is connected up your tow hook, connected up 1 servo, typically the servo that you put on the stabilizer, and we've got connected up the battery. So now what we're going to do is turn the timer off. So turn off that switch that's on the other side, and we're going to bring in these other 2 servos. So I bring in another servo, and notice it's the same arrangement, is that we plug that in, starting here, and we'll sit that servo down, and we can see it. Let's plug in the other servo. Now notice that the same with the first servo, you can see these little metal flutes that are on the connector. Now here is the here's the radio DT, so I'm going to plug in that now as the third item on that row. So now we've got, so that the hook is, the setup is the same as before. We've got 3 servos, we've got our tow hook, our radio DT, and our battery. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn on the timer again, like I did last time. It makes that beeping noise, and now I'm going to make the hook go forward. You'll notice now that all of the servos are moving. So this means that we've connected up the servos right, and everything is good. So I'm now going to go through that same launch process, which is make the hook go forward, and then do the unlatch. It makes that buzzing noise. I then let it go. So now it's like your airplane is flying. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move this in front of the camera for a moment, but this is the transmitter for my radio DT. So this won't work, in this particular kind of radio DT won't work if it's that close to the receiver. That's this little green box here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move it out of underneath the camera and put it behind my back so it's further away so the signal doesn't swamp it. But let me move, so I'm just moving it now, and I'm pushing the button. Notice when I pushed the button, that servo moved. That meant the radio DT then activated, it DT'd the model, and now the beeping has stopped because the model has been DT'd and landed. So now what I'm going to do is turn off the timer with a little switch. So let's go back over what we've been through. So what we did was, first of all, we connected up the battery, one of the servos, the servo that you would use for the stabilizer, and the tow hook. And we made the tow hook go backwards and forwards, and then the tow hook unlatch, and we saw the servo movement. So this shows to us that we've connected the hook up right and that we've connected up the servo correctly. The next step was to hook up the other 2 servos and the radio DT. We did it in 2 steps on this timer because on this timer those connectors are in 2 different rows, and it's easiest to do it round that way. And also, if you connect up something wrong, you can find out what you did wrong much quicker. So we connected it up. We went through that same launch process and showed that those other servos work, and then finally that the radio DT works. So we've now shown ourselves how the timer works. So the next step now is to figure out how we would mount the timer and the servos and the radio DT and the battery and everything in our model. But it's most important that you understand how all this works before you put it in the model. Thank you.